In 1972, Wes Craven released Last House on the Left and immediately became an exploitation icon. Over the next decade, he released films to varying responses. And while The Hills Have Eyes was a cult classic, films like Deadly Blessing and Swamp Thing were modest successes at best. However, on November 9th, 1984, everything changed. A relatively new indie distributor, New Line Cinema, released A Nightmare on Elm Street, which was written and directed by Wes Craven, and the film immediately made Craven an icon of the horror genre. Nightmare on Elm Street went on to make $57 million on its $1.8 million budget, and for a time was among the highest-grossing independent films of all time. The studio even became known as the House Freddy Built. With all the popularity of the original film, it was only a matter of time before they released a sequel, and that sequel led to a franchise. We brought together all of the horror fans at Geekscape and asked them their own personal rankings in order for us to make this list. I'm Matt Kelly from Geekscape TV and the Horror Movie Night podcast, and this is the definitive rankings of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Also, it goes without saying, spoilers ahead. Number 9, Nightmare on Elm Street, the 2010 remake. This will probably shock no one that the remake of Nightmare on Elm Street is in dead last on this list. I tend to be a remake apologist myself. There are a ton of remakes even within the last 2 decades that I'm willing to defend, whether it be the criminally underrated Fright Night remake or the unfairly hated Child's Play remake. But this one is borderline indefensible. At the time it was released, Platinum Dunes had been releasing horror remakes to mixed results. Remakes like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Amityville Horror, The Hitcher, and Friday the 13th divided fan bases, but few were as unanimously disliked as the Nightmare on Elm Street remake. We could do a full video on everything this movie did wrong, but the biggest issues stem from the fact that the film doesn't try to do anything truly new or interesting. They recreate exact shots from the original movie, but in a way that somehow looks cheaper despite the higher budget. One of the only unique ideas is that it proposes the concept that maybe Freddy was an innocent man. And while this could have been an interesting thread to follow, they just as quickly revealed that no, he in fact was not innocent, and we just wasted 20 minutes on a pretty dull detective plotline. The one positive I will give this movie is Jackie Earle Haley's performance as Freddy Krueger. At the time of the film's release, it was trashed for its new, more authentic burn victim look of Freddy, and not casting Robert Englund, but I truly believe that Jackie's performance is probably the only interesting thing in the film. The rest is best forgotten. Number 8, Freddy vs. Jason.
Place your bets!
This film, along with number 7 on our list, were easily the most divided films. Some people ranked it as among the best, while others ranked it towards the bottom. At the time of Freddy vs. Jason's release, I was devastated that I missed it in theaters, but I rented it the first day it was available. This had been the film that every horror fan had been waiting for since 1993 when Freddy's glove grabbed Jason's mask at the end of Jason Goes to Hell. At the time that I watched the movie, I thought it was amazing, but I also thought that when I watched Phantom Menace for the first time. When you spend over a decade anticipating a movie, your brain will not allow you to accept that it's anything short of perfection on your first viewing. Time has not been particularly kind to Freddy vs. Jason. Beyond the obvious issues, specifically a line of dialogue, the movie as a whole just feels like a disjointed mess. This isn't shocking given that the film was in development hell for years and changed hands pretty frequently. The other big strike, in my opinion, is that at its core, it just feels more like a successful Jason movie than a Freddy movie. Despite how much Freddy is front and center throughout the film, he barely succeeds in killing really anyone. When we are treated to the nightmares, they are typically among the highlights of the movie, specifically Mark Davis's early nightmare sequence. But when we're in the real world dealing with the Jason kills, I always feel like the energy gets sucked out of the film. That being said, I know that there are going to be people who are really pissed at how low this movie ranked. And all I can say is, don't blame me, blame everyone else's rankings. This is just math. Number 7, Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare.
Every town has an Elm Street.
I'm biased here, but I really think that this is too low. I am very vocally a pro Freddy's Dead person. In fact, on my personal list, I put this as my number 3. That being said, I get it. This movie is an absolute mess. At the time Freddy's Dead was released, it was promoted as the final film, hence the title. In fact, they even held a funeral for Freddy, and it did seem like the end of a franchise until that familiar glove grabbed a familiar hockey mask 2 years later. As far as send-offs to classic movie monsters go, it's not one of the best. If you're of the mindset that the goofier Freddy gets, the worse he is, then this film will be your personal hell. Freddy is practically a Looney Tunes cartoon character more than an evil child murderer dream demon. The film bites off way more than it can chew, and we deal with a weird search for Freddy's child, a 3D battle, and one of the lowest body counts in Freddy history. But despite all that, I love this movie. Part of it might be due to it being the first Freddy film I ever saw one Sunday afternoon on the USA channel. But even without the rose-tinted glasses, there's something with my love of campy horror movies that makes me unable to resist this film. It's packed with outrageous cameos. The dream sequences are practically half the movie, and at least 2 of them are fairly iconic. You'd be hard-pressed to find a Freddy fan who doesn't have at least a little bit of a guilty pleasure towards the video game kill. And personally, in all sincerity, I find Carlos's death to be one of the most upsetting and mean-spirited kills in the entire franchise. Despite all those positives and my personal love for it, the flaws of this film clearly outweighed the pros for most people. Number 6, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5, The Dream Child. To editorialize again, in my opinion, this is at the bottom, just above the remake. I've always found this film confusing and difficult to follow, and I never really connected with any of the characters. I usually find the teens in Nightmare on Elm Street films to be among the most likable teenagers in any slasher movie, but by the time I reach Dream Child, I'm just annoyed by everybody. That being said, there are people who absolutely adore this film, and I can see why. Even a hater like myself cannot deny that the dream sequences in this movie have a real flair. Credit must be given to director Stephen Hopkins. This film's visuals are definitely among the best in the franchise history. Unfortunately, the strict MPAA ratings board caused way too much to be cut from the film and made it a difficult mess to follow. Despite all of that, there are some amazing kills in this movie. I highly recommend checking out the documentary Never Sleep Again, where you can see some of the footage that was cut. And even I can't deny that there's probably a truly great movie that we could have gotten without all of the MPAA interference. Number 5, Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge.
You are all my children now.
For decades, this was looked at as the absolute worst Nightmare on Elm Street movie. But it's definitely not. Then, roughly 10 to 15 years ago, it got a reevaluation as an important horror film in queer history and was reappraised as one of the best in the franchise, which it's also not. The overwhelming praise has leveled off, and the film is now seen for what it is, a perfectly fine sequel that's right in the middle of the franchise. So let's start with the positives. The movie does a lot of unique things for a sequel. Instead of a survivor girl, we have a survivor boy, which is interesting to say the least. And instead of being a traditional slasher film, it's more of a possession film. Finally, the movie is campy as hell, which, given how much I love Freddy's Dead, that's a pretty big plus for me. On the negative side of things, though, it's a huge ask to go into such a different direction on the first sequel of a franchise. While there are amazing campy scenes like the possessed bird or the leather bar sequence, there's also moments that are dull as dirt and seem to go on forever. Even the subtle queer messaging kind of falls apart when the ending seems to imply that all Jesse needs is a good straight girl to make him blend in with society. Whether this is your favorite or least favorite Nightmare movie, it's highly recommended you check out the documentary Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street, about star Mark Patton's life. Number 4, Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master. It's been said this is the film that took Freddy from beloved slasher to cultural icon. That could be for a few reasons. For starters, the film was heavily pushed on MTV. Following the film, the merchandising of talking dolls, Late night hotlines and child's pajamas all began to explode. The excitement led to this being the highest grossing film in the entire franchise until Freddy vs. Jason. I never know how to feel about this particular entry. On one hand, it has my absolute favorite nightmare sequence. The cockroach kill will go down as one of the most impressive and innovative examples of what Freddy's dream logic can do. But it also has some of the absolute worst, like the invisible karate scene. This has been called the MTV Nightmare movie, and I get why. There's a moment where Freddy literally throws on sunglasses like he's about to hear the CSI theme any second. Regardless, this is definitely one of the films where if I walked into a room and it was on the TV, I'm going to sit down and watch it. Who am I kidding? That's kind of still applies to all of them. Even you, Remake. Number 3, Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Earlier I spoke about how Freddy's Revenge was a bit off the beaten path and audiences turned on it. Weirdly, a decade later when Wes Craven's New Nightmare came out, audiences welcomed it with open arms. 2 years before Scream made meta horror extremely popular, Wes Craven tested the meta waters with this film. Truly unique for its time, the sequel follows the lives of the actual actors and creators of the franchise as they begin to get haunted by a dream demon looking quite a bit like Freddy. The design is a little bit different. His power set is also just a little bit different. But when strange things begin happening to Heather Langenkamp and her family, she has no option but to face her fears and fight this new Freddy in order to protect her son. Craven's script managed to incorporate a ton of real-life situations like Heather Langenkamp's stalker, her husband's career as a special effects artist, as well as an earthquake that was happening while they were filming. There's really no way that there will ever be another film quite like this one. Which, good, because why would you try to fix perfection? Number 2, Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. This one came so close to being our number 1. It was literally the difference of 2 points. If Freddy's Revenge was the wrong way to do a sequel, Dream Warriors is the right way. The film continues to develop Freddy's powers, his history, and it makes all the teens even more likable than before. The film follows a group of teenagers in a hospital for suicide attempts and insomnia while they try to avoid Freddy. However, instead of running, the teens learn how to manipulate their dreams so that they have superpowers. Every single kill is memorable, and it brings back some of your favorite characters from the first film who were absent in Freddy's Revenge. In the grand scheme of horror franchises, this is, without competition, the best sequel in slasher history. This, of course, means, however, that number 1 is the original Nightmare on Elm Street. What Wes Craven was able to do with the first film is truly an unbelievable feat. This low-budget movie with a high-level concept just works in every way imaginable. It has a likable cast of teens, nightmare sequences that are brilliantly shot and expertly paced, and Freddy is genuinely unsettling. There are so many iconic moments, whether it's the glove coming out of the bathtub, the blood exploding out of Johnny Depp's bed, or Tina's nightmarish bedroom kill. In a world of slow-moving muscle men with machetes, Freddy stood out as a true original. It never should have worked, and yet somehow against all odds, it did. For $1.8 million, Wes Craven took a newspaper article, a childhood memory of a drunk man outside of his bedroom window, and the name of his biggest bully, and created one of the most beloved icons in cinematic history. So that's our list. How do you think we did? Was something too high? Was something too low? Let us know in the comments. Please like and subscribe for more videos like this, and stay tuned for more rankings from Geekscape TV.